So we're moving into the legislative panel, and this session is an opportunity to engage in a nonpartisan dialogue about transportation policy in Vermont with members of the Senate and House Transportation Committees and Chittenden County legislators. The session will be moderated by Sean Robinson with Vermont Digger. Sean is an award-winning journalist covering state government and economic issues for Vermont Digger. During the legislative session, he also co-authors Vermont Digger's daily politics newsletter, Final Reading. With that, this will be about a 30-minute dialogue with Sean and the legislators, and then we'll have 15 minutes for questions from the audience. Take it away, Sean.
Thank you, Sandy, and thanks to the legislators for being here as well. So I guess to start, thinking back on the last legislative biennium and your time on the transportation and then also on the general and housing committees, what do you think worked well in the realm of sustainable transit infrastructure? What are some things that you, would point to as highlights? Leave it open to anyone to start.
I'd be happy to start. So I want to also just start by thanking Sandy and everybody on the CATMA team for doing this event. This has been a phenomenal experience. This is the third year running, and I'm glad to have been here, I think, all 3 years. I'm pretty sure I was here the first year, too. And I just want to say, people that stick around for the last session are the transportation diehards, okay? The ones that left are the transportation interested, but I really appreciate you all being here today. So I'm Thomas Chittenden. I serve in the Senate, and I do serve on the Senate Transportation Committee. Some things that I think worked well last session, and I definitely hope that others will fill in the gaps. I was excited to see a lot of our incentive program, or some of our incentive programs start to look at fleet vehicles. Fleet vehicles put on twice as many miles as a residential home vehicle does, between 12,000 per year versus 25,000 per year. And if we can electrify those fleets, we're going to have twice as much impact on reducing our carbon emissions. But the other ancillary benefit of having more of our fleet purchase vehicles for commercials, nonprofits, and municipal entities, they put on more miles and they enter the used market faster. We need more cheaper electric vehicles on the market. And so having fleets electrified has the benefit of reducing our carbon emissions twice as much while also introducing more EVs in the aftermarket on a faster timescale. So I was excited to see that. I think we, as much as this did get some coverage, and there are different sides of this issue, I think it was smart that we instituted an electric vehicle charging infrastructure fee for hybrid vehicles, plug-in hybrids, as well as battery electric vehicles. Those vehicles don't pay as much for the plug-in hybrids in gas taxes to pay for our roads, to paint, plow, and pave them. And our battery electric vehicles are also not contributing at the pump for those necessary services that they need to use our roads. So starting this year, a plug-in hybrid electrics, I believe, are paying an extra $80 or $90 per year, something like that, and then the battery electrics are about twice that, and that was estimated on what the average gas fuel vehicle was actually contributing at the pump for gas taxes to pay for our roadways. So I know there are pros and cons to that, and it might stifle adoption of electric vehicles. I'm really worried about that, and we need to watch the numbers to see the adoption rates continue, but we do need to shore up the gap, the shortfall in revenues from our gas taxes, and I think having electric vehicles contribute in that way, directing the dollars to electrical vehicle infrastructure charging stations, I think is something that makes sense, and I'm looking forward to seeing that materialize over the coming years. I'm really excited to hear about the VTrans report on the Western Climate Initiative and the New York Cap and Invest. I understand the report will be coming back in December and then presented to the legislature. Should I be successful in this election and returning to the legislature in January, I'm really interested to hear what VTrans comes up with on that front. And then the last point, and then tell me if I'm talking too long, Sean, I was very proud that we did find some money for Green Mountain Transit. It wasn't enough, as you can all tell, that we're looking at reductions in services that the board is struggling with, but there were times when no additional resources from the state were going to go to GMT, and we were able to find $635,000. We need to find more, and I think that's one of the coming questions to talk about other funding sources, but I'll leave it there.
Anyone else want to add on to that? Thanks, Senator.
Hi, I'll take a go. Yeah, the things I was very happy about, I think we made some headway in some issues that were real equity deficits for us. So charging infrastructure that is being we increased resources to have that at multifamily dwellings and also at workplaces. So that's increasing who has access to charging infrastructure for EVs. And we made some really important safety improvements for vulnerable users in our roads. And we also strengthened provisions for smart growth in our communities so that when a VTrans road project comes in, there is a little bit more deference given towards local planning goals that the community has to be included in planning for complete streets. So we have a long way to go still with that, but it's a meaningful increase. And then the other thing that I'm really pleased with is that we did increase funding for bicycles and pedestrian infrastructure. Not as much as we need, again, but we did kind of narrow the delta from the year before.
Hello. Is that, oh, all right, it takes a minute. Well, yeah, I'm Emily Krasnow, and I represent a portion of South Burlington. And as Sean mentioned, I do not serve on the Transportation Committee. I serve on a General and Housing Committee, but I really have been talking to a lot of folks today about how important the connection of housing and transportation and how we really can't talk about housing without transportation. I'm grateful to live in a community where I'm right on a bus line, and I also grew up in rural Vermont, so really bringing those different perspectives. My colleagues really talked about some of the work that we've done, and looking forward to getting into some more conversations about where we need to go. But I generally look at transportation as a human services issue, and focusing on that, and we'll continue to do so next session.
Thank you. Senator Chinden, you mentioned the new annual fee on EV drivers that the legislature worked on this year. Question I had going off of that, where do the three of you see opportunities to increase funding to support EV programs and infrastructure? Also, could broaden it to multimodal transportation more generally. Obviously, there's always a million competing pressures for funding in the State House every year, but do you see opportunities to increase that funding anywhere going forward? Any of you? Yeah.
I'll go jump in again. I don't want to be rude. So I'll jump on that. They are starting to call me Tommy Tax in the State House because I serve on the Senate Finance Committee, and I'm not afraid of the word tax. Now, I know taxes has a very negative connotation, but you have to pay for government services somehow, and it's a matter of doing it fairly and where it comes from and how you collect it. So looking at ways to subsidize electric vehicle charging as well as public transportation and things that we need like paving, plowing, and painting our roads, you have to look at revenue sources. One place I support, and I've said this consistently in my 4 years, I used to serve on the Green Mountain Transit Board as well, and I see a connection between an increased car registration assessment to directly fund public transportation. So if you put $10 fee on every car that's registered in the state, 239,000 vehicles, there's another $2 million that can help subsidize public transit, but there's a rational leap for me that those that are registering a car contributing to congestion and network traffic should subsidize those that are taking the bus. But in that vein, I get that some places are not served by public transportation and to pay a registration fee out in the rural communities. I think there's a counterpoint to that they are still using roads that are served by public transportation. But in that realm of car registration fees, I think we should look at what you can check me on this. I recall hearing 17 other states do this. It's in that ballpark. An ad valorem car registration fee. Here in Vermont, if you register a 10-year-old Cavalier, you're paying the same amount as somebody who buys one of those new Teslas that looks like a silver tank. So you're paying the same amount for an $80,000 vehicle as you are for a $2,000, what I would colloquially refer to as a beater. So those cars, I would argue, are also paying the purchase and use taxes more frequently because they have shorter lifespans. The counterpoint to an ad valorem fee is that the state of Vermont has a purchase and use. When you buy a car, I just bought a Honda Accord. I paid maybe $3,000 purchase and use tax, and so that's our comparable to an ad valorem. It's based on the price of the car. But my concern is that people that buy a brand new Tesla monster truck or a new ID4, they're getting 8 to 9 years out of a new vehicle, and they're only paying that purchase and use tax once when they buy the car. Whereas those that rely on used cars, older cars, they're paying the same registration fee even though the value of the car is disproportionately much smaller, and they're also buying them more frequently. So I think we should look at ad valorem fees to match our tax policy with our ability to pay, and I think that's a way to directly fund public transportation that deserves more look at. The other things that came up in the last session that should I be reelected, I think we need to consider more is a shipping package fee. So we are increasingly having stuff come home to our houses, and those UPS trucks and FedEx trucks need painted, plowed, and paved roads. The dirt roads are really problematic. You've probably seen the videos. So if they want to help contribute to our transportation services, and we all want to do that, maybe having an additional surcharge on shipping packages, I'm open to that. Rental car fees, things that also come up. I know I'm running for re-election, and talking about taxes is one of the worst things I could be doing right now, but I'm a terrible politician, and so I'll also say that last session it came up a couple of times thinking about gas taxes. What we charge in Vermont, we are not the highest in the nation on gas taxes, and we do have some sensitization so that the gas tax is capped when the price of the gallon of gas goes up to a certain level. It doesn't go any higher. I think that's a rational thing. But if we truly want to decrease our reliance on fossil fuels for transporting goods and services, one thing to do, and I take this from Ronald Reagan, from my conservative friends, I have heard a mantra that tax what you don't like, subsidize what you do. If we increase our gas taxes, that will actually make the economic calculus for transporting goods, purchasing your next vehicle, more attractive to buy more fuel-efficient vehicles or electric vehicles, because the gas taxes that you're going to pay are ultimately going to make it more challenging. I also remember, and I'm probably talking too much, Sean, when I served on Green Mountain Transit, gas prices. As gas prices went up, public transportation ridership also went up. So they were aligned that the higher gas prices cost, the more people want to take public transit, because the economics, the calculus, helps drive you to justify getting on those buses. And that's what we do want to do. We want to incent people to take buses. I have talked way too much, so I'll stop there.
Does anyone else want to add on to that? Or? No pressure. Yeah.
I covered it all.
Yeah. See if my editors can let me slip Tommy Tax into an article next session. It's pretty good. Haven't heard that one. Representative Krasnow, I think you mentioned this connection between housing and transportation that's obviously so important. A big topic of discussion, debate in the legislature this year was the Act 250 reforms, right, that a lot of folks worked on. I'm curious, sort of thinking about those land use reforms through a transportation lens, and interested in how we can better develop land use policies that are in line with our transit goals as well. So curious if that's something that's come up in your discussions, or how you think about that too.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate that question. As I mentioned before, we can't talk about affordable housing without talking about transportation. And where I live, in South Burlington and many parts of Chittenden County, I have constituents and neighbors who that is a critical part of why they live where they do. And we want, as a policymaker, we want them to be able to maintain those choices to live there and have those services. As someone also who is in a generation that has spent most of my life concerned about the climate crisis, I often, my peers and I think about that as well. And so for all the new housing that has gone up, in South Burlington, in Chittenden, where I represent, we have hundreds and hundreds of new units, and they're all on a bus line, which is critical. So when I get asked about what kind of housing we need, it is housing that is on the bus line, has bike and pedestrian infrastructure through our city. We're so lucky to have a wonderful municipal delegation that really promotes a lot of those. But as far as the policy work that we did in the State House, we did a lot of, I feel, a lot of good work around housing policy, and had a lot of landmark legislation around Act 250 that had been stalled for a long time. I think we have more work to do when we go back. There's some loops that need to be closed in a couple areas, and I'm looking forward to tackling some of that. But I think we need to continue to make long-term sustainable investments in both transportation and infrastructure and housing. And so that's something that I'm going to be working on, is kind of a long-term vision for where we see both of those sectors go and how they can work together. But I appreciate that question.
It's been stated that it costs $10,000 roughly to own and operate a car. So the requirement to have a car in order to live, which is the fact in most of Vermont, really cost burdens households. So I think with the Act 250 reforms that are going to allow us for the first time to focus development with housing, hopefully income diverse housing in our centers, this is an opportunity that, particularly if we leverage opportunities to co-locate this with transit, to provide car light and car free lifestyles for more Vermonters than currently can enjoy those.
I have a lot to say. So I would just echo everything I just heard. And when it comes to land use, two areas that I do think we need to look at from a transportation lens more, and I remember speaking about this last year when I served on this, is parking, the true cost of free parking, and I want to relax parking minimums in specific targeted areas like transportation corridors, and start encouraging and incenting us building up and not just out, so that we have taller buildings, which drives more public transportation, more need for that. So that's absolutely useful. I also want us to try to incent dual purpose of our parking lots. I think of Taft's Corners. I see so much empty parking just sitting there all the time. And I'm Tommy Tax, so please don't use that in one of your articles, Sean. But if we started to tax parking spaces, unless organizations that own them allow them to be used for park and rides, for commuter parking, for solar panels, so that they do purpose. I'd rather solar panels over our parking lots than out in our green fields. I think that would be a way to drive some of other policies to start looking at the true cost of free parking and aligning our tax policy with that.
Yeah, I live in Taft's Corners, so I've definitely seen what you're talking about there. Yeah. This is a little bit more of a specific, but so this past summer, the EPA rejected Vermont's application for the Federal Climate Pollution Reduction Implementation Grant, which I'm glad I said correctly this time. My understanding is that that's something that the Scott administration and lawmakers wanted to use to support these grants that have come up, I think, a lot in today's sessions, assisting low and moderate income folks with the transition to cleaner mobility options like EVs. I don't know if that's something that's come up in your discussions in the State House, but curious if there are areas we can draw from to kind of get that money from somewhere else or to fill those gaps.
Look forward to hearing, if I'm reelected, hearing what the administration proposes. I can say that we have, in terms of our climate reduction funding, we have a couple of different buckets of money. And I'm not really sure how we're going to solve this particular dilemma, which is significant. But again, with the land use changes, we can at least forge ahead with pursuing smart growth, which will, set the stage to reduce emissions in the long run. The other opportunity that we have is to make some more advances at providing more charging infrastructure, which will, in the long run, support the transition to EVs, and which we've been sort of stuck not being able to make as much progress as we would like. There is about 21 million and some change for Vermont to provide charging infrastructure, and what is envisioned under this particular federal program, which is known by its short name, NEVI, is charging infrastructure within a mile of every interstate exit, and then also every 25 miles on our state highways. So I think we're sort of headed in a direction where we're the idea is really to kind of like we have gas stations for cars, sort of the same sort of conveniences for people who are driving EVs. So one of the things that we might do as we sort of figure out how to address the problem of being able to finance EVs for in the ways that we had been, is make some progress on the charging infrastructure, so that when we do get to that point where we can identify new revenue sources, we'll be in better shape for people who might be inclined to make that mode shift.
I couldn't agree more.
Succinct that time, Senator. Yeah. Wanted to open it up for folks who wanted to ask questions as well. Do we have 10 minutes or so left? Yeah. Sure, yeah. Oh, we're getting a mic? Okay. That makes sense, yeah.
And can you please repeat the question?
Oh, sure. Was just looking for questions from the audience. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. This has been great. I'm curious, as we've heard a lot about the intersection between transportation and housing and land use and all of these different topics. I appreciate having somebody here from not a transportation committee, and while the transportation committees do so much work, I'm curious if you all have any thoughts on how both the House and the Senate can better work with different committees on transportation issues outside of the transportation committees themselves. Thank you.
No, thank you. I really appreciate that. I think for me as a legislator, everything I do, I think of through different lenses. It's really important. And I do think that we need to collaborate with I call it downstairs, because that's where they usually are, with the downstairs a lot more, and work less siloed together. And that would be really helpful for a lot of my colleagues. We work really hard on something and spend many months on our vision, and they have a different vision, or vice versa, and it can be really difficult. And I think one of the ways that we can connect, and we talked about this on the panel that I was on earlier, is through caucuses. So our Climate Solutions Caucus, we talk about transportation there a lot. I am the co-chair of the Working Vermonters Caucus, so we talk about things that are important to working Vermonters. And obviously transportation and is a huge topic there. But I really think that, collaboration as we craft policy with each other is going to be really important, as well as regional collaboration can be helpful. That we have a rural caucus, which I don't think any of us are really as involved in. But, just really working together and checking in with each other on different committees is really been helpful. We are very siloed in each committee focus, but I encourage my colleagues and fellow legislators to not be as siloed and to really look outside the box and how we can relate policies to each other. And transportation is, like I said, is linked to human services, housing, air environment, and energy, and so many other things. So that's why I always appreciate being involved in the conversations. But
Yeah, any other?
if you want to work with the House or nah, okay.
Any other questions? Yeah, toward the back.
You can hold it for me? Okay, you're holding it for me. So I've heard that the state EV rebate program is pretty much zero. And is the State House thinking about replenishing those funds for next year?
I'll be glad to take that one. I'd say yes. So I was also just surprised to hear in the previous presentation from VTrans, thank you, that the e-bike incentives, there are still money in the e-bikes available. To me, e-bikes are great, but when you look at your impact and reduction in CO2, of the different options that are available in the reports I've seen, e-bikes have some of the lowest bang for their buck, so to speak. So I personally, but that's not the way the system works. I as just one legislator out of 180, can't redirect those resources out of session without going through the whole legislative process and having the governor sign things. So that can't happen immediately. I think that the VTrans does a phenomenal job, and we're going to look forward to their recommendations on finding those resources, but I would bring it back to the conversation about other revenue streams. We have a declining gas tax revenue, and that's in a way a good thing. We're getting less money from the pump because of better fuel efficiencies of our vehicles, as well as the electrification of our fleets, but we do need to pay for transportation initiatives, including electrifying even more, because we have more work to do to meet our carbon emissions goals. So as one of 180 legislators, I personally want to see those EV incentives funded. Selfishly, I'm looking to replace my minivan with an electric vehicle, and I would like to get an incentive. So if I'm qualified, we have pretty good qualifications though, and you need to meet certain income thresholds. I don't know if I'd be there or not, but.
Other questions?
Okay, so the state transportation budget is about $870 million, and we see so many program shortfalls, such as Green Mountain Transit, such as the EV incentive program, and so many other programs that we want to see adopted that have so many great co-benefits. So do you see anything specifically within the transportation budget or the general fund that can be diverted towards these programs because they are such great benefits for the whole society? And if there are any areas.
I'll take a stab at that one again.
Sorry, I was finicking with the
No,
computer.
you're
Go
good,
ahead.
you're
Yeah.
good. So, Rob, specifically, no. But do I think that we should look at going on a road diet? I do. And so we need to think about where we want to be as a state. That's why I did support the housing bill. One of the biggest arguments against it was the road rule. And I don't want to see more of Vermont cut up with roads and our mountainsides, but I do want to see more Vermonters. And I think that can be accomplished through incentivizing growth in our downtown areas. And that might come with some reconsideration of where roads currently are. We can't leave people stranded, but we might want to look at how our roads are currently sprawling around the state and thinking of ways that maybe we start a long-term, this is not going to happen overnight, none of these things happen overnight, but thinking differently about how we maintain what our road network looks like and not expanding it, but instead making it more concise, more targeted, more specific, more narrowed. Something better, Representative Lally?
Sure. Well, we're in the dreaming big kind of question here. I look at it, we have, roughly 6,000 linear miles of state highway, I believe, in Vermont, something around there. I'm not quite sure of the number, but it's in the ballpark. And I really think that, in the current era, we need to look at that as an asset that does provides more benefits than just mobility, particularly now that we have remote work. We have many pressing needs. We have a housing crisis. We're trying to transition to a lower emissions transportation sector. We have significant public health and mental health challenges because, you know, we have lifestyles where we never walk anywhere anymore. We don't meet anybody in real life anymore. You know, I think I see this as a median for doing a lot of things better, if only we could look at things that way. This is a world that we do not currently live in terms of transportation policy in this state. I serve on this committee because I hope to change that. And again, I think that with the land use reform that we just passed, we have set the stage for being able to do that because we figured out where we want to have people-focused places in this state. And then, you know, so we have the opportunity to reimagine what transportation looks like, you know, so it will serve different needs within communities. Outside of communities, it can possibly remain somewhat the same. I'm actually less interested in that, other than we have to harden the infrastructure, so it's sustainable with flooding. But if you look at it that way, then you are providing an awful lot of opportunities to increase revenues in ways that we need. For example, what if we had villages, and particularly all places with three-phase power, I think, should be used for, those main streets should be used for charging EVs. And, you know, somebody has to charge an EV for 20 or 30 minutes. That's an opportunity to have, you know, support local businesses. You can sort of see where I'm going with this. So I think, you know, we have the opportunity to think differently and out of the box, and it could be a much more wonderful, make Vermont a much more wonderful place to live, have a business, go to school, age in place, many things.
I've got another one really quick. And I'd love to hear feedback on this. So one thing I hear has been considered before I would join the legislature, but there's a whole new crop of legislators, is sponsor a highway. So I'm not endorsing this, but that could raise more revenues from people that would like to sponsor segments of state highways as to develop that comes into our signage. And I'm not talking billboards, but those small signages, that is another revenue opportunity that we have not been doing in the state. So maybe that answers your question, Rob, as another place to possibly take in another $1 million or $3 million by reconsidering that policy. I am not endorsing adopt a highway signs. I would just love to hear more thoughts on that notion that other states do.
Thank you all. Maybe one more question.
Hi, I'm wondering when we start having a statewide conversation about encouraging the electric vehicle battery producers to stop mining precious metals in developing countries and hurting other populations in the world.
I'll take that one. I welcome that conversation. I think we need to factor that into our discussions and our incentives. And if we have incentives that only go towards electrical vehicles that are mining or collecting these minerals in equitable, safe, and in ways that we support as a country that are aligned with our values, I would certainly support other caveats to these incentive programs to consider where these minerals are sourced.
Hello? Yep. That's exactly how I would articulate it. I'm open and happy that those conversations and things are being discussed and more. And I'm also happy to talk about it and take a look at those as well. Yeah.
I would just say that, you know, that you don't create any needs for mining batteries if you live in a place where you can walk and bike to meet more daily needs, or take a bus, which may be running on a battery, but, you know, your impacts are greatly diminished because, you know, you're packing in, I don't know, how many people fit on a bus, Clayton?
Well, we have about 5,000 people a day who use the service who are not going to be using cars.
Yeah, okay, so there's a good number right there, 5,000 a day. The other thing is, you know, I think micromobility is, again, if we thought about how we conceive of the purposes of transportation as providing access instead of maybe mobility, which is, it's a subtle shift, but it's meaningful. You know, micromobility, those are smaller devices, use smaller batteries, right? There may be some cost efficiencies there. I don't know for sure, but it's something to look into. It seems maybe not the best move to just be electrifying our existing very wasteful car paradigm. You know, when you think of all the resources that go into, like, for example, an SUV EV, that's substantial. And I really welcome that question, and we'll give it some consideration.
Thank you all. And I think we're right at time then. Yeah. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I was just going to ask that. Yeah.
I wanted to add, thank you so much for moderating and for this event. And earlier I did a panel on advocacy and how you can connect with your legislators. And so I believe, and I think my colleagues on this panel believe, that transportation needs to be at the very top and forefront of our discussions because of how it relates to and also so many other issues. So I'm hoping that all of you will reach out to us, reach out to your legislators and organizations that you partner with to really advocate for the changes that you want to see, because you all are going to be far more effective and because you have the experiences and the real boots on the ground or wheels on the bus that can help drive change. So I'm hoping to talk to all of you more I don't have an opponent, so I am coming back. So I hope that we can all work together to drive substantial change. So thank you so much.
Yeah, if you wanted to add something. Yeah.
So I'd echo all of those things, and I'd say legislators are generalists. We have to vote on literally everything in the State House. We're not experts on everything. If I was an expert on everything, I'd probably be doing something else and making a lot more money doing it. But the point I'm trying to make is I look to groups like this to reach out to me, to Clayton Clark, to Tim Barrett, to Ted Brady, to individuals that know their issues, their communities, and the best part of this job is hearing from all of you. So my best advice is please reach out. I love having coffee with individuals that know the issues and know where we should be focusing our attention, because I cannot stay abreast of everything that we need to be focused on. So I look for community leaders like yourselves that understand these issues to help hone and focus my lens.
I would just say that in Vermont, a lot of really wonderful change kind of comes from the bottom up. And so, you know, please be agents of change in your communities, and that will help us do a better job as we navigate this incredible transition that we're all living through, and figure out how to right size it for the future of Vermont. I'm kind of a big believer in the idea of the seventh generation. So that's kind of where we are right now, is, you know, what is that going to look like for the next couple hundred years? So I think we have incredible potential in our state and opportunities that lie ahead, and I would welcome all of your input in that. Thanks.
Thank you all. Yeah.
Alrighty, that concludes today's program. Thank you so much for your time and all your work, and for being with us here today. I really appreciate it. Hope everyone had a fantastic day, met some new colleagues, strengthened some relationships, have a notebook or laptop filled with notes and information and resources and ideas. The mums, there's some mums around in this room, and if folks would like to take one home, minus the basket, you are welcome to do so. Thank you again to our generous slate of sponsors, our keynotes, our legislators, our presenters, the TRC students, exhibitors, and to all of you for being here today with us, working to improve mobility and transportation for all Vermonters. Cheers to the CATMA team for all your energy and hard work in organizing this event.